Welcome to this explainer. Listen, right now the US-Iran conflict is moving at absolute breakneck speed. We're seeing conflicting reports, high-stakes military maneuvers, and diplomatic back channels shifting literally by the hour. So today, we're going to take a step back and distill this chaotic web of live updates into a clear, completely impartial narrative. We're cutting through the noise so you can actually understand the real dynamics at play here. Let's just jump right in.
To make sense of everything happening all at once, we've broken this down into 4 parts. We'll look at the brink of war, the power shifts and peace talks, the global economic chokehold, and finally, the key flashpoints and escalating threats.
Okay, starting with part 1, on the brink of war, a timeline of escalation. Let's actually map this out because the timeline here is wild. It started back on February 28th with those initial US and Israeli strikes that killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, which then led to the US enforcing a strict maritime blockade in mid-April. But I really want you to pay attention to this recent, crazy acceleration. Just this past Monday, US President Donald Trump canceled planned strikes when he was, in his own words, an hour away from launching them. He cited requests from Persian Gulf allies who apparently saw some progress in peace talks. But then, just 2 days later on Wednesday, Trump shifted his tone entirely, publicly declaring that he is in no hurry for a deal.
It's really fascinating to look at the current U.S. position right now. It's this mix of confident patience and claimed total leverage. When asked specifically about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump confidently stated, "He'll do whatever I want him to do." And he's pairing this asserted control with a stated desire to minimize casualties, emphasizing that he's essentially waiting for the absolute 100% right answers from Iran before making his next move.
But then you look at the other side, and it's a stark juxtaposition. Placing Washington's optimism right next to Tehran's promise of unimaginable retaliation really shows you just how incredibly fragile this moment is. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is explicitly warning that any renewed US or Israeli attacks won't just be met with local resistance. They're threatening to push the war beyond the region with crushing blows in places their enemies, quote, cannot even imagine.
Which brings us right to Section 2, Power Shifts and Peace Talks, the back-channel diplomacy. So while the public rhetoric is flaring up, behind closed doors, it's a very different story. There's this incredibly fragile step-by-step diplomatic pipeline happening right now that relies heavily on Pakistan to bridge the massive gap between Washington and Tehran. The U.S. has actually transmitted new proposals, and Pakistan's army chief physically traveled to Tehran to facilitate these delicate talks. Right now, Iran is reviewing those proposals against their own original 14-point framework, a framework that notably demands an end to the war on all fronts and the total lifting of the U.S. naval blockade.
But who's actually running these talks for Iran? Well, it's gotten really complex with this sudden emergence of Brigadier General Ahmad Vahidi as the key negotiator. He is a hardline veteran of the Revolutionary Guard and a figure linked to past crackdowns. And with the new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei reportedly severely wounded and in hiding, experts are saying Vahidi and his inner circle have essentially consolidated direct control over both Iran's military response and their entire negotiation strategy.
Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that Iranian leadership does not view the current ceasefire as a surrender. Not at all. They see it as a strategic pause in an existential endurance test. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf explicitly stated that they're in a war of wills, noting that whoever wins will determine Iran's future. They are framing this standoff as a profound, make-or-break historical moment for their nation's survival, using this time to actively rebuild military capabilities.
Moving on to Section 3, the global economic chokehold, looking at shipping and sanctions.
Why does all this geopolitical maneuvering actually matter to the average person? Well, just look at the markets. The mere hope, just the hope of a peace deal sent absolute shockwaves through the global economy. Global oil prices plunged by over 5% in a single day. The second President Trump mentioned that the U.S. is in the final stages regarding Iran, the economic relief was palpable across international benchmarks.
Yet, out on the water, the reality is a lot more complicated. We need to talk about a brand new entity called the PGSA, or the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. This is a newly created Iranian domestic organization that is attempting to fundamentally rewrite the rules of international shipping. They are claiming absolute legal authority to manage transit, and they even want to collect fees from commercial ships passing through the incredibly critical Strait of Hormuz. It's honestly like looking at a split screen of 2 completely different realities operating in the exact same body of water. On one side, U.S. Central Command says they are strictly enforcing a naval blockade. They report redirecting 90 commercial ships and even disabling 4 vessels just to ensure compliance.
But flip over to Iran's PGSA, and they insist they have absolute control. They claim that 26 commercial vessels, including a South Korean oil tanker, just passed safely through the strait, but only because they had explicit Iranian permission to do so.
And the stakes here? They are staggering. We are talking about a fifth of all global oil shipping relying on the Strait of Hormuz. But maybe even more alarming, a third of the entire world's fertilizer supply passes right through this exact waterway. The UN is explicitly warning us that these disruptions could literally starve farmers of fertilizer and trigger a severe global food price crisis in the coming months. So yeah, this isn't just about fuel anymore. It's about the global food supply.
Finally, let's get into Section 4, flashpoints and escalating threats, focusing on the human and political cost.
If you want to understand the deep, fundamental mistrust that makes these negotiations so incredibly difficult, just look at how both sides describe the exact same tragic event from the first day of the war. There's a deadly strike on a girls' school that killed over 165 people. U.S. Central Command states it was a complex strike because the school was located right on a missile site operated by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry completely rejects that, calling the U.S. assertion an appalling lie, a baseless fabrication, and a clear war crime. Two entirely polarized narratives.
And we can't forget that the conflict's radius goes way beyond just the U.S. and Iran. The human cost is heartbreaking. A devastating 3,073 casualties are now reported in Lebanon from ongoing Israeli strikes. Even with a localized mid-April ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, the violence and the human toll just continue to climb steadily across the broader region.
Meanwhile, the political heat is rising globally. Back in the U.S., the Senate advanced a really rare resolution attempting to limit President Trump's war powers in Iran. On the global stage, alliances are shifting. China and Russia have mutually condemned the U.S. and Israeli strikes, calling them illegal. And over in Europe, Italy went as far as summoning the Israeli ambassador after a video surfaced showing the degrading treatment of pro-Palestinian flotilla activists by a senior Israeli official. The fallout is truly everywhere.
But bringing it all back down to the micro level, to the everyday people, ordinary citizens in Tehran, are trapped in an impossibly tense situation right now. They're caught between devastating economic realities, we're talking mass layoffs and spiraling food prices, and a literal armed mobilization. The Revolutionary Guard is now regularly out in the streets, providing civilians with assault rifle training, essentially preparing the entire population for a potential invasion.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the ultimate, high-stakes question that's defining this very moment. Will this quiet, incredibly fragile back-channel diplomacy actually secure a lasting ceasefire? Or is the region inevitably headed for total war? The pendulum is still swinging, and the whole world is watching to see where it finally stops. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and remember to keep looking closely at the facts.